Damn it.
Nemesis Season 1. What a show. Everything you'd want from a Courtney Kemp show that she's involved in, and let's be honest, a lot of us definitely know what to expect when it comes to what Courtney Kemp can deliver. We've all watched Power before, but at the same time, sometimes we don't know what she can deliver, because that's just what she does. At the drop of a dime, there'll be a moment that makes us question a certain character, as I'm sure we all question Charlie's true intentions, because at one point she put a target on Deon's back, Noah's back, and also sent Harper after Coltrane. Courtney Kemp can make us question all these character morals, ethical dilemmas that they may have, their integrity, reputation, as we did with Isaiah Stiles. A lot of you will be very familiar with the theme good versus evil. It's what we saw here when you find yourselves questioning both Coltrane and Isaiah in terms of their decision making. There may be a mole, just like we saw Harper, or a CI with Andre, or an undercover cop who played a part in Dion's downfall. Love, as we saw with Ebony and Candice facing their own issues, twists and turns that we don't expect, action, violence, sex, death, and well, power. And this show had it all from start to finish, and one of the biggest compliments that I could actually give this show was the fact that I found myself not really comparing it much to Power. Sure, there were a lot of Easter eggs and nods to Power with familiar faces, but this show definitely had all the traits of a Courtney Kemp show, but with a great twist. It was more than just about cops and robbers, it was more than just about Coltrane Wilder versus Isaiah Stiles. However, these were two characters who were center stage with everything existing around them. They were integral to this first season, with Stiles looking to avenge his former partner's murder that happened 2 years ago, and in his eyesight he had a team who he was after that was led by Coltrane Wilder, the same team that killed Stiles' trainee partner, Manny Shaw. After another jewelry store heist goes wrong, Stiles locked in on Coltrane as his main suspect and becomes obsessed with putting him and his crew in jail. The problem he had was, his obsession and his overzealous nature starts to have a huge impact on his own personal life with his wife Candice, his son Noah, and also his career. Come the end, who won? Coltrane said he won, but in reality, did either of them win or did they both lose? Are we in for a round 2? There's definitely a lot of talking points to take away from this season of Nemesis, and judging by the ending, I don't think it's going to be a one season thing either. I do think there will be a season 2, so I will be dropping a couple of breakdowns on Nemesis. We're going to be running through a recap and asking the question in regards to good versus evil, Isaiah Stiles versus Coltrane Wilder. In the follow-up videos, we'll run through more theories, character analyses, diving deeper into the psyche of some of these characters, as well as a lot of the power references that I'm sure you guys noticed as well, because there definitely were quite a few familiar faces, and also the mention of ghosts a few times as well. With that being said, let's get into the story of Nemesis Season 1, where business was business until it became personal. Now the show opens up on Halloween night in Beverly Hills with Coltrane and Ebony Wilder pulling off a heist. We saw Coltrane slipping through the side door while Ebony kept up her appearances from inside. And I was really impressed with the way they moved, the way they handled their business, especially Train. He was a man who was very well prepared and calm. Straight off the bat, they gave us a glimpse of who these guys were and what this show was about. He had a team that was made up of himself, Stro, Dion, and Choi, and also his wife Ebony played a part as well. They'd been working together for 12 years, and in episode 1, we saw them clean out a poker room full of guests, with one of them being their own. As we learned a bit later on, they always have an extra planted just in case things were to go south, and we definitely know how quick things can turn, as we all learned a bit later on. We also saw none other than Cooper Sachs, who went by the name Harvey. Now they were here for the money and nothing else. It didn't matter if Harvey was wearing a Patek that was worth 250k. Coltrane from the minute go showed he was very meticulous, strategic, calm, collected, methodical, and a man with not only just a plan, he expects you to stick to the plan. The plan was to raid the gambling spot for 1.7 million, but it was Dion who decided to steal the Patek, and ever since, it was a snowball effect with Dion, who you could really tell from the jump would end up being a liability, because in all honesty, that's what he was, a liability. Now Coltrane and his crew hadn't really hit that many robberies over the past year or so. They normally hit 4 robberies per year, but we learned they hadn't hit one in the last 7 months. That was because of Ebony's unfortunate miscarriage. So these guys were really hungry, especially Dion. He had a lot of mouths to feed, as we learned he had a wife and a whole separate life that nobody knew about. Now on the other side of the law, we had Isaiah Stiles. He was going through a bit of a rough patch when it came to his personal life and also his career. He was separated from his wife Candice, and he's never really been the same ever since the death of his trainee partner, Manny Shaw. Over the past 2 years, he's continued to put his job first, which has basically become his obsession. Even when he's with his son Noah, when he's playing basketball, or whether they're having lunch, he's always got his walkie-talkie, or he's always constantly texting to check up on his cases. And that naturally caused a wedge in his relationship with Candice, and also pushed Noah in Amos's direction, who is Isaiah Stiles' father, aka Nightmare. If you want to look at an example from Power, the moment Ghost was distracted, and especially the period where he was in jail, who did we see Tariq gravitate towards? It was the influence of Kane and Stark. But back to Nemesis, we learned a bit later on just how he got his nickname, because he was a menace in the streets, he was a ruthless OG, and there was also a lot of history here between Isaiah and Amos as well. Amos's history is one of the reasons why he wanted to keep Noah away from Nightmare, and a few of the young guns later on also found out exactly why he was called Nightmare. He really was basically a nightmare. Now, what made this plot between cops and robbers really intriguing from the jump was the fact that Isaiah's wife Candice and Coltrane's wife Ebony, they became close friends through a community project, all while in the background their husbands were waging war against each other in the streets, and that's a relationship that really begins to shift the dynamic throughout this season, with Ebony playing a role within Coltrane's organization. It didn't matter if Candice was a friend, she got vital details about Isaiah Stiles' case, fed that to Coltrane, and even pushed her in the direction of Malik. More on that a bit later on. So there definitely was a really interesting dynamic unfolding in the background, away from Stiles versus Wilder, and each chess piece, each chess move, and each and every single character was integral to the larger storyline and the chessboard. Now things start to take a real turn when Dion continues to make more mistakes, and it was more than just one. Stealing the Patek was one thing, which Coltrane, Choi and Stroh dealt with a side mission. They broke into Harvey's home and gave him the watch back, which meant the complaint and case was dropped. But Dion stealing the Patek was one thing. He then got distracted during the second mission we saw because he was way too invested in his side hustle. And when I mean his side hustle, I mean gambling. During the raid of the 3 jewelry stores, he got distracted by the TV when they were going through the sports scores, and that's what gave the guards the time to pull their piece, which meant they had no choice but to fire back and killing those 2 guards. When Charlie then learned about what happened, when she realized that Dion was the problem, she even tried to have him eliminated. The same goes with Bianca. Any liabilities, any loose threads, any loose slips, they have to go. But again, Coltrane is a man who is very well prepared, snipers up in the hills, and what did we say about Coltrane before? This was a man who always did his due diligence, he's a man who played chess and was ready for any given situation. He even knew Charlie was behind it. The problem with this was the damage that Dion caused was way too big to undo. The way he was speaking, C-Day, cuz, his gambling problem, his constant mistakes and him being distracted, that was always going to give Isaiah Stiles his way in. And that's exactly how he managed to close in. Stiles used one of his connections in the gang unit, who was Ika, to find a CI who was within a gambling operation. He questioned whether anybody was putting large money on the Clippers or anybody making large bets. He then led him to Dion. So thanks to Dion, they all pretty much ended up on Stiles' radar, and from then on, it really was a ticking time bomb. Dion was a ticking time bomb. The next job, which was the final heist, the job that would set him up for life, actually went smooth as it could have done. Dion actually really held it down. He didn't blink or get distracted. Everybody played their role and played their part. They got the ketamine and that was it. That was supposed to be them done for good. The problem was the buyer then backed out, which left everybody in limbo, from Charlie to Coltrane, all the way down to Dion, who was affected by it the most. Now, regardless of whether there was a payday or no payday, this was Coltrane's final job. He kept his word to his crew, and he was now keeping his word to Ebony. She was pregnant again, they had their second chance, and with Coltrane making her a promise to get out of this game, that's exactly what he was sticking by. But Dion being Dion, him living 2 separate lives with 2 women, having kids with another woman, him having to provide for both, all while dealing with his gambling habit, he just couldn't help himself. He took the key from Choi, he took the product, and he thought he could make a deal on his own with connections that he had in the streets. He spoke about how everybody always underestimated him, thought that he couldn't do things on his own or that he wouldn't amount to much, and this was him trying to prove everyone wrong. He was trying to prove that he's got what it takes to make these deals on his own. Unfortunately, all he did was prove why he needs supervision, or why he's a soldier and not a leader. So with him cutting his own deal on the side, he was caught in a sting operation involving an undercover cop, where Dion then goes out in heavy gunfire. Now, even though Stiles wanted him alive, that was the moment where Stiles finally got one up on Coltrane, the moment where everything changed, and also where the battle between Stiles and Coltrane began to explode into action. We then saw Isaiah confront Coltrane while he was beside his own father's grave, and this was him making his chess moves. We learned earlier on when Coltrane was in prison, he was very quiet, kept himself to himself, and he was someone who always played chess. But this was Isaiah Stiles now making his move, closing the walls in from every single direction. He didn't just deliver the news that Dion was dead, he raided Wilder Holdings with his assets frozen, he embarrassed Wilder, ruined his reputation, integrity, and image. And for the first time, Stiles was on top. He wasn't just here to play games, like we said earlier on, and when you have someone as obsessed as Stiles, it can really go one of two ways. And we actually did see both ways play out in the subsequent episodes, where his obsession went against him, but also where it put him on the right path of uncovering the truth, and eventually also his team, thanks to Detective Cruz. But the fact that he was here making these moves of not just raiding Wilder Holdings, but also Coltrane and Ebony's home, the room that they had set up for their baby that they just lost, Coltrane knew the only move to make in this situation was to go on the attack. He had to play on the offensive. Ebony wanted to leave the US, but Train said the best decision was to stay the course, see this through, because sometimes the best form of defense is actually attack. Him, Stro, and Choi made Dean a promise that they were gonna make things right. They took away Dion, they took away Coltrane's money, his business, his reputation, and now he was promising to take everything away from Stiles. And they weren't afraid to take it in blood either. Now, if it wasn't clear and obvious already which side you guys were on at this moment in time, I'm sure right about now you would have probably made your choice if you hadn't made your choice before. And I do think it is important to say, even though I am actually Team Wilder, he may have been a reformed businessman, he may have been out of the game at one point where he did manage to turn his life around, but he definitely isn't a good guy. He's a cop killer, a thief, a violent man who wasn't afraid to take it to the streets and also take blood. We saw how he killed countless of cops. He definitely isn't a good guy. Like we previously made the case for Ghost not being the good guy of power, but somehow you find yourself rooting for them anyway. But as the story progresses and as the story unfolds, you then start to uncover more layers of this particular character. On the other side, you had a very obsessive cop who wanted to do things the right way. He wanted to bring these guys in and get justice the right way. But sometimes his overzealous nature can always go against these types of characters, and I don't think there is a right or wrong in terms of who you're rooting for. Some will be on Team Stiles and some would have been on Team Coltrane, but if you were on the fence in terms of who you were rooting for, by the time we got to this particular stage here, I'm sure this would have been the moment where you would have made your choice, Team Isaiah Stiles or Team Coltrane Wilder. Now, Coltrane definitely knew he was up against it. Stiles had made his move and he was closing in from every single direction. So this is where we saw Train deploy a multi-layered revenge mission that included Candice being set up with Malik, so they could then use this in a blackmail scheme if they needed to a bit later on. Throughout his own investigation, he also learned that Amos was Stiles' father and their relationship wasn't that great. That's also something that Train decided to play on to get back at Stiles. One of the best forms of attacking someone in this type of game is the use of family. They're not in the drug game as such, but the same principles definitely apply that we often speak about so often with power. When it comes to weaknesses in the street game, they definitely still stand. Family can be targeted as a form of weakness, and this was a very clever chess move by Train, using Amos not just as a wheelman but framing him for Andre's murder at the same time, making him take the fall. The way in which he gave the gun to Amos just to get his fingerprints on it, just so they could use it to frame him for Andre's murder, was a very clever chess move. Again, showing how Coltrane is someone who always thought 3 moves ahead. Now, Train did also warn if the cops were in their way, they were going to hit them hard. And that's exactly what we saw around the episode 6 mark. A crazy gunfire starts with a lot of law enforcement members going down. And again, I will ask you guys the question. You may not agree with Stiles' methods or his overzealous nature, but was he right in terms of Wilder being a bad guy? I definitely think so. Just think about how many innocent lives would have been lost in this situation. Now, during this gunfight, the trainee Brinkley also took a shot to the chest from Amos. I often do say during my breakdowns of power, history doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme, and this was one of those moments. When Amos and Stiles locked eyes, Stiles hesitated to pull the trigger, but Amos didn't. However, the only guys from the crew that managed to escape were Amos and Coltrane. Stro took a couple of hits and so did Choi, who are both in police custody at this moment in time and in hospital recovering. And that's something to definitely keep in mind for season 2. Now, due to all this chaos, there was always going to be consequences and repercussions, and one of them was Stiles losing his gun and badge, which in my opinion shouldn't really be a shock to anyone. However, we knew this was never really going to stop Stiles from doing whatever he wanted to do, continue chasing this case and continue chasing Coltrane Wilder. We know cops who are overzealous and obsessive, they'll stop at nothing to get what they want, especially with Amos now being pulled into the situation by Coltrane. And that was really the next battle between Train and Stiles. The first to get to Amos. Train wanted to get rid of a loose thread, and Stiles wanted to get to his father to get to justice, and also because he wanted Train. Now with Amos, he was planning his escape through an old acquaintance, Earl Hayes. He owned a strip club, but he still had his hand in the import and export business. He was basically the man who could get Amos across the border into Mexico. With Stiles, he did eventually find the name Earl Hayes through Ika, and he did come face to face with his pops in the strip club, where Train was watching on as well. They were both there for the same man. At the same time, we also saw Harper slipping Train a package, and that was Stiles' gun that was taken from him when he was suspended. Unfortunately, none of them could do anything at this particular moment in time because in came law enforcement. But with Train being 3 moves ahead, he knew Amos couldn't leave without taking back the necklace of Josiah. That was Amos' second son, who'd unfortunately passed away many years before. He overheard a lot of conversations and also saw the necklace himself when he broke into Josiah's house. He knew before Amos made his escape, there was no way he would leave without that chain. And that's where they came face to face. That's where Amos went down with Noah hiding in the cupboard, witnessing Train killing his grandfather. Checkmate. Now with Amos's death, Noah at the crime scene, Stiles being at the crime scene, a cop who at that particular moment in time was suspended due to his obsession and mistakes, Cruz, Captain Jimmy and Harper walking into the crime scene, they didn't know what to think or make of the situation. They don't know if it was Noah who pulled the trigger with a gun in hand. They don't know if it was Stiles who pulled the trigger. They had no idea if Noah pulled the trigger, with Stiles then taking the rap for his son. The whole situation was a complete and utter mess. A mess that Captain Jimmy did want to help with. He did give Stiles a way out of the situation by trying to tell him they'll make him look like the hero in the situation, because this is someone who he actually really cared for. He wanted to make Stiles the next captain after he had retired. He was also there at the Thanksgiving with their family, but this was a situation which was beyond his control and also beyond Stiles' control. Train played it perfectly up until this point with a couple of hiccups along the way, but this was the best possible outcome for Train. Stiles suspended and in handcuffs, and his obsession and overzealous nature going against him. All the evidence, everything at this moment in time pointed against Isaiah Stiles, which is where Train and Ebony decided to deliver the hammer blow. As I mentioned before, sometimes the best form of defense is attack, and that's exactly what he did here. They went into the lion's den with Sam and Breck, their lawyers. They threatened to hit them with a lawsuit due to Stiles' obsession, and they definitely had plenty of evidence to back their case. Even though you had Detective Corella, aka Benny Proctor, who believed Noah, who believed Stiles, who asked Malik to just ask Train just one question that could potentially catch him off guard. They even had him in their back pocket through the chess move that they made a couple of episodes prior. Malik did also mention a couple of episodes prior that he's never been able to beat Breck. As I mentioned before, Train played the perfect multi-layered chess move revenge mission, and it really did look like it was game over for Stiles. But he did also leave Cruz with something to think about. The proof that he's innocent is the fact that his gun was used to kill Nightmare, and with this being his former partner, someone who knew him, it definitely gave her something to think about, and that's where she made the move with Candice and the necklace that only happened to be a wire. They caught Ebony on conspiracy to commit murder where it came to Noah, who at that moment in time disappeared. Now, with Ebony in custody, she's left with a choice between either giving up Wilder or giving up her sister, with Cruz really pushing on the heartstrings of her unborn child. As it is, she knows what it's like to lose one child. She didn't want to be in that position again. But the fact that her relationship with her sister Charlie has been on thin ice, the fact that she made the decision to interfere in her miscarriage, I think that's definitely what pushed Ebony over the edge in terms of making the decision to choose Wilder over Charlie. Now, Charlie agrees to back off from Noah, but she did tell Harper that there was a new target in mind. The new target was of course going to be Coltrane, and we did see them later get into a fight where there was only ever going to be one winner in this situation. Meanwhile, with Stiles, he slipped off the ankle monitor because at this point he just kind of did whatever he wanted to, but he had to go and find Noah, where he found him at a party plotting to kill Coltrane himself, where he promised he'll take him down himself. And to do so, he turned to Miguel Alvarez of the Alvarez cartel. He asked them to kill Coltrane Wilder, and this is what Courtney Kemp had to say on this particular situation. By the time that happens, the death of Nightmare and him being accused of that death, cracked something in him where he's not the guy we met in episode 1. He's right and wrong, the black and white are not quite as divided. Now the cartel does kind of do its job, although they weren't to know they haven't taken Ebony, they actually took Candice by mistake. Both Candice and Ebony were in the house at that moment in time with Ebony escaping, but they grabbed Candice thinking she was Coltrane's wife. Now Candice does eventually help Coltrane find out the whereabouts of Ebony, and she was actually in hospital. She slipped and hurt herself and she was in hospital. The baby was fine, but she was heavily guarded by law enforcement. They knew once they had Ebony, there was no way Wilder wouldn't come to the rescue. But again, this is someone who we've spoken about as being 3 moves ahead. He spoke to Charlie and he told her that they needed to put their differences aside and look at the bigger picture. The bigger picture being the welfare of Ebony and her unborn baby. So Charlie sent in a team of nurses to break her sister out, while Coltrane used himself as bait to distract law enforcement. And that's where we see another chase where it really did turn out to be everyone against Wilder. You had law enforcement chasing him, you had the Alvarez cartel chasing him, with even Noah and Amos people after him. It was literally everyone against Coltrane Wilder, where it then came down to one final showdown. With Noah having Coltrane at gunpoint boxed in, Stiles was forced to choose between Noah and Coltrane Wilder, with Noah being hit from a stray bullet from the Alvarez cartel. And this was someone who he'd been chasing from episode 1. And it comes back around to the question that I asked at the beginning of this particular breakdown: did anybody really win? Courtney Kemp mentioned at this moment in time, at the final minute, having lost almost everything and never having made a choice in favor of their families, they finally make the right decision. But again, even though Stiles makes the right decision in saving his son and Coltrane Wilder saying he won, did he really? Even though they both chose their families over their obsession, did they really win? I do think the damage is already done when it comes to season 2, which we're going to see unfold. Candice has already fallen into the arms of Malik, Stiles has already made an enemy of the cartel. Even though Ebony is safe, will Coltrane be able to find her with Charlie, someone who's wanted to keep her away and try to take her sister away from Coltrane? Wilder's reputation and business is also in ruins. Choi and Stroh are in police custody. Noah has also been corrupted by Amos, and we all know from Power what path these kids can easily go down with the wrong influence and experience. So they've definitely taken a lot of losses, which I do think will unfold in season 2. With that being said, that will be my next breakdown for Nemesis, which is running through what we can expect for all things season 2, because there definitely are a lot of questions and loose threads they can tap into with the ending of Coltrane Wilder on the run, and in my opinion, it's just the beginning of round 2 between Isaiah Stiles and Coltrane Wilder. We know how Courtney Kemp can really twist these characters, potentially making enemies work together. There are plenty of examples from her previous shows, but we definitely have a lot of time to unpack that over the next coming weeks. So with that being said, drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section on all things Nemesis 1. Let me know what you thought of Courtney Kemp's fair show away from Power. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.